Now with that basic understanding, you please understand that whenever we are talking about classical evolutionism, just remember that savagery, barbarism, civilization. In this majorly E.B. Taylor, and we see E.B. Taylor's contribution to what? Religion, right? E.B. Taylor's contribution with respect to ancestor worship. That is another dimension which you have to understand. Then we have L.H. Morgan. L.H. Morgan majorly contributed to the evolution of family and majorly contributed to evolution of state organizations. And when you look at James Fraser, you see whenever we have magic, religion and science, we use James Fraser. And whenever we have the aspects of totemism, we use James Fraser. Because you please understand, my dear, whole of your thinkers in answer writing has to emerge from 6th chapter. That is the minimum that any of us can do when we are writing paper 1. Right? So, and most of them are dealing with what? Classical evolutionist perspective, where they believed in psychic unity of mankind. That's one. Now when you look at diffusionists, we don't use these people much, but one among them that you see is with respect to W.H.R. Rivers. When you look at W.H.R. Rivers, you see W.H.R. Rivers studying the Thoda Society. Right? W.H.R. Rivers studying the Thoda Society. And apart from that, you also see we use American diffusionism. In the context of American diffusionism, we have A.L. Kroeber and Clark Wiesler. And you see that this particular concept can be used as part of something called as sacred complex. When you look at sacred complex, the core concept of sacred complex is what? You see that there is a sacred center. Then slowly as you move out, what is happening? You are reaching a boundary, that is the region of Kshetra. And what do you observe? You see that as you move from core to the boundary, what happens? The sacredness reduces. And the core concept of this was given in the context of culture complex. By whom? Culture complex by American diffusionists. So when you are writing American diffusionism and culture complex, culture configuration, use sacred complex. That's very important. And who has given the basic concept of sacred complex? That is L.B. Vidyarthi. And who are the other thinkers who have given sacred complex? It is B.N. Saraswati who has given sacred complex with respect to the regions of Nepal. Now in the context of Makanja has also given sacred complex. Cora Du Bois also has given sacred complex. She studied the temples of what? Bhuvaneshwar. She studied the temples of Bhuvaneshwar. So Cora Du Bois, Makanja, B.N. Saraswati, L.B. Vidyarthi, these 4 are the people who have given some aspects of sacred complex, right? So that is one basic understanding again. Now, whenever we are talking about historical particularism, you please remember that in the context of historical particularism, it is Franz Boas. Franz Boas can also be seen to be majorly a cultural determinist. Majorly a cultural determinist. And you also see he believed in collection of data. And whenever you wish to have the aspects of cultural relativism, definitely speak about historical particularism. And you have to understand that this particular historical particularism and the studies of Franz Boas have actually influenced culture personality school, because you see Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead were students of Franz Boas. And they have influenced the culture personality school to a larger extent. And you also remember we state Franz Boas when we are writing race. Whenever we want to debunk the concept of race, we bring in Franz Boas. Because Franz Boas talks about race is more of a biological construct. Race is more of a biological construct. That is what is given by Franz Boas here, right? So that is one understanding.
Says how is he called cultural determinist?
How is he called cultural determinist? You please understand. Whenever he is talking about cultures, he says that every culture has a history. And don't compare. And he talks about culture determining many things. But only in one place he uses biology, that is in the context of race. Only in one place. But rest of the times you see him, his students, everybody, what is he saying?
Right.
About culture determinism only. Right? Because he is a staunch enemy of Noam Chomsky. And what is Noam Chomsky always telling about biological determinism? Now, when you see language theory, the biological theory of language given by Noam Chomsky, it says what? Human beings have language acquisition device. And because of the language acquisition device, we see human beings have language. And that is the biology influencing culture. But all of these people oppose Noam Chomsky's studies always, and they say it's nothing to do with biological determinism, it is an cultural deterministic dimension which is existing. So that is one thing that you'll have to remember. Then apart from that, when you look at the aspects of functionalism, we see Malinowski. And Malinowski says what? It is all about meeting needs. And you would state Malinowski when we are studying about family. You would state Malinowski when you are studying about religion. You would state Malinowski when we are studying about the economic systems, and especially in the economic systems, the Kula exchange. Especially in the economic systems with respect to Kula exchange, we would bring in Malinowski. And the biggest criticism of Malinowski is what mostly the patriarchal approach which he has followed, and where he has undermined the role of women. So whenever you would want to criticize Malinowski, it is the feministic perspective which is going to criticize Malinowski. Another dimension that you will use Malinowski to a larger extent is how as the evolution of fieldwork. Now when you look at evolution of fieldwork, what fundamentally happens, we see in the context of fieldworks, we divide that into 4 different phases. One, pre-Malinowskian phase, Malinowskian phase, post-Malinowskian phase, and contemporary phase. When you look at pre-Malinowskian phase is mostly armchair anthropologists who are prevalent there. Apart from armchair anthropologists who are seen to be existing there with respect to the pre-Malinowskian, it is all dependent upon certain stories, it is all dependent upon certain compilations, it is all dependent upon certain expeditions. That means what? The major source here was the secondary source of understanding. The secondary source of understanding became the basis for fieldwork in the context of pre-Malinowskian phase. In the Malinowskian phase, what do we see? The major characteristic feature is the participant observation. Talking about participant observation, he speaks about the prerequisites. And when he is talking about the prerequisite of Malinowskian phase or fieldwork, what are those? Build rapport. Not only build rapport, learn the language. Learn the language, build the rapport, and be part of the society and culture of that particular field wherever the work is being done. And that would technically improve the nature of the fieldwork, and the emphasis is, that is why we call Malinowski as the father of fieldwork. That is why we call Malinowski as the father of fieldwork, one. Then apart from that, when you look at the post-Malinowskian phase, in the post-Malinowskian phase, we started seeing the onset of technology into the fieldwork. And not only onset of the technology into the fieldwork, but we also see emergence of women anthropologists. And when we are talking about emergence of women anthropologists, the classic example is Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead. Slowly we see the onset of women anthropologists. Then apart from that, you also see the contemporary phase. In the contemporary phase, you see the understanding of ethnographic studies started changing. When you look at the understanding of ethnographic studies started changing, it started talking about something called as autoethnography. Autoethnography fundamentally means the study of the self, where the family was considered as the fieldwork, where the individual social media was considered as the fieldwork. And not only autoethnography, during this particular phase, we started seeing the emergence of media anthropologists. When we talk about media anthropologists, they were doing fieldwork on the social media. And they were trying to understand, there is a book called The Internet Celebrity. There is a book called The Internet Celebrity, written by Abedin. And when you look at this book, the core understanding of the internet celebrity was, they were seeing what are the ways followed by social influencers to become famous. What are the ways followed by social influencers to become famous? So in that context, we have this nature of fieldwork changing. Then apart from that, in the contemporary phase of fieldwork, you would also see, apart from media, it is more of experiential ethnography, experimental ethnography. It is more of experiential ethnography and it is more of experimental ethnography which is being conducted in the phase of contemporary, right? And you also observe that along with this transition of field work, you see the scope of anthropology is also seen to be transitioning. Previously, when you see the scope, it was more theoretical in nature, and slowly after theoretical in nature, it became more applied. And today, what do we see? We see the phase of action anthropology. And when we look at applied anthropology, it is with respect to the interdisciplinary nature of the subject. But whereas when we look at action anthropology, it is about more to deal with the problem solving dimension of the society that is seen to be exist. And not only that, we also see in this particular phase of action anthropology, we have something called as pluralism as a phenomena which is exist. When I say pluralism as a phenomena, it could be with respect to the applications of that respective concept. It might be the political anthropology, it might be economic anthropology, it might be religion anthropology, whatever. We see the pluralistic applications are seen to be exist. And here slowly what are we seeing when we reach the contemporary phase of field work? Today we are more bothered about ethics in field work. And when you look at ethics in field work, A.W. Green talks about the ethics in field work. And when you look at this ethics in field work, it is majorly dealing with what? It is majorly dealing with the aspects of reliability, the aspects of utility, the aspects of privacy, the aspects of the accountability, the aspects of reliability, utility, privacy, and accountability. That means whenever you're collecting a kind of information or data from all of this, you have to understand that all these are very, very important. And one kind of challenge that we see, even in spite of having participant observation, is we see an aspect of Hawthorne effect. And when we talk about this Hawthorne effect, it fundamentally means what? The society becomes conscious of the observation by the participant there. So in that context, what happens? The behavior that is expressed by those individuals in the society might not portray the real picture. So that is one biggest criticism of participant observation that we observe or that we see. So that is one more simple understanding that you need to have with respect to field work. Now just an extension, if I do one more thing, we'll finish 8th chapter here. You see, we have something called as data collection techniques. This year, highly anticipated question. Data collection techniques, very much important, and I'm expecting it for this year. Now, when we look at this data collection techniques, we see there are two. One is the intensive methods. The other one is the survey methods. When we look at the intensive methods, it could be participant observation, it could be case study, it could be interview, right? It could be participant observation, it could be case study, it could be interview, it could be genealogy. All these are what? Intensive methods.
Non-positivist. All of them non-positive.
No, I don't call them as non-positivist. I would fundamentally divide them on the basis of the depth of the study. Right? Depth of the study. So intensive methods are very deep. I'm going to get into the details and the personal aspects to a larger extent. But when I look at the survey methods, in survey methods you have questionnaire, you have schedule, the life histories, the oral histories. All these are going to be part of what? All of these are going to be survey methods. That means what? Where am I having deeper understanding? I'm having deeper understanding in intensive methods. Now, whenever you're writing this question, you see, you talk about what is the process, one line process. You talk about what are the merits and demerits. And along with which you will have to give an example of anthropologist who has used that technique. Who has used participant observation? Malinowski. Who has used the case study? Anybody, my dear. You have to understand that case study is a miniature version of participant observation. So you can talk about Cora Dubois, right? You can talk about W.H.R. Rivers when you were studying Thoda Society. Anybody who has used interview? Margaret Mead. Who has used genealogy? W.H.R. Rivers. You can never forget rivers in genealogy. Now, when you look at questionnaire, majorly L.H. Morgan, you can never forget L.H. Morgan with respect to questionnaire, right? Then give one example for each, right? We don't have much of the examples for life histories and oral histories. You just give an passing reference here, right? So that is one simple understanding with respect to data collection techniques. Now you know the difference between technique, method, methodology. This is what technique is. What it is, a tool of data collection. What is the method? Method is the process of data collection. And what is methodology? Methodology is nothing but a respective framework. Methodology is nothing but a respective framework. That is basic difference between two: technique, method and methodology. Whenever they ask you the methods in anthropology, please write comparative method. One is comparative method. In comparative method, whenever they ask you methods, don't mess it up. Whenever they ask methods, don't simply write these data collection techniques. Those are connection techniques. Whenever they ask you method, one method is comparative method. And when we look at comparative method, one aspect of comparative method is what, my dear? Ethnology. What is ethnology? Ethnography is what? A detailed study of single society. Ethnology is what? A comparison of two societies. Comparison of two societies, that is society and culture. The comparative approach could be what? Diachronic and synchronic approach. Now when we see diachronic and synchronic, this is depending upon past, and synchronic is past as well as the present understanding. The second method that you will have to see is holistic method. As I already discussed yesterday about holistic method, use the 4 branches and talk about SBC, that is the social, biological and cultural. The third method that we see apart from holistic method is the scientific method. The scientific method. In scientific method, what are you supposed to write? One aspect is inductive and deductive. Inductive methodology is data to conclusion. Deductive methodology is assumptions to validation. And apart from that, positivist and non-positivism. Positivism and non-positivism, and non-positivism is nothing but the phenomenological understanding. That is a scientific method that you will have to mention. Then apart from that, if you wish to write, you can even talk about emic versus ethic. Emic versus ethic. If you want, you can even talk about the thick description versus thin description. The thick description versus thin description. You see, thick description was used by whom? Clifford Geertz, right? Who has given this particular concept? The concept was given by Gilbert Ryle. Gilbert Ryle talks about this concept of thick description and thin description, and who has used it? It was used by Clifford Geertz. It was used by Clifford Geertz. So thick description is talking about what? Thick description is talking about context, a layer by layer approach, an onion peel approach. And whereas when you look at thin description, it is only talking about what? Text, not context. Right? Thin description is talking about text, whereas thick description is talking about context, fundamental understanding, right? So this is one more probable question which could be seen with respect to methods, right? So that is another important understanding that you need to have here. Once you see this dimension of methods, we have almost finished 8th chapter, right? Now getting back to the same 6th chapter, when you talk about R.C. Brown, R.C. Brown, we use it in ancestor worship. R.C. Brown we use in kinship. Where do we use in kinship? Especially the descent theory of kinship. R.C. Brown we use it with respect to religion. R.C. Brown we use with respect to the social control mechanisms of chapter 4. Social control mechanisms of chapter 4, that is where we use R.C. Brown, right? And R.C. Brown has done field work on whom? Andaman Islanders. R.C. Brown has done field work on Andaman Islanders. And you also see he is talking about what? Structural functionalism. R.C. Brown is talking about structural functionalism. And you also see the concept of solidarity. The concept of solidarity taken from whom? Emile Durkheim. He believes in the concept of organic solidarity. And one aspect that he sees is what? Organismic approach. organismic approach. Organismic approach and organic solidarity of Emile Durkheim. What is this organismic approach? That means he perceives that society is like the body. And when he perceives that society is like the body, all the components of the society should be working like the body parts. And when they are working in the tandem, we see the body to be healthy, and in the similar manner, we find that the components will fundamentally maintain the structure. Structural functionalism. Right? So that is another important dimension of R.C. Brown. Then apart from that, when we look at structuralism, now structuralism, we have one very, very important person, that is Levi-Strauss. Levi-Strauss. Now when you look at Levi-Strauss, the major focus of Levi-Strauss that you see is to understand the structure of the society. To understand the structure of the society, and he sees that any society has a surface structure and a deep structure. And what is observed, the deep structures of all of the societies might be very similar. And whereas surface structures are what are varying with respect to any society. And he also says that if you have to observe the deep structure, go through the surface structure. Go through the surface structure to understand the deep structure. Right? That is what is structuralism understanding. And he also says what? You use Levi-Strauss in the context of alliance theory. Use Levi-Strauss in the context of alliance theory. But apart from that, you can also use Levi-Strauss in the context of exchange, where he says that exchange is a mechanism to maintain the structure of the society. And whenever we look at this exchange, exchange of goods, right? Exchange of goods, exchange of gifts. And apart from that, the third one that you see is exchange of women, right? Sorry, goods and gifts is the same. It is exchange of words. It is exchange of words. Exchange of goods, gifts, exchange of words, and exchange of women. And these three exchanges would fundamentally maintain the structure of the society. Would fundamentally maintain the structure of the society, and that is what is observed there. And this exchange of women has been slowly translated into alliance theory. What is happening when we look at the Levi-Strauss understanding? Levi-Strauss talks about incest taboo. And because of incest taboo, what happens is you see the accumulation of women in the society. And because of accumulation of women in the society, what is happening is you see that it might lead to potential conflict. And in order to maintain peace and order and structure in the society, the peace, order and structure in the society, what was observed? That you need to go for exchange of women. And this exchange of women has resulted in something called as alliance theory. Exchange of women has resulted in something called as alliance theory, where we perceive that marriage is primary, where we perceive that women is part of the, or women is an important social person, and where we perceived that incest was a positive force which was existing in the society. Because when we look at descent theory, what was happening, we found that incest was more considered to be a negative concept. But here it is more of a positive concept that is seen, positive force that is seen here. So that is one fundamental understanding with respect to structuralism. Yes? Then apart from that, you can also use Levi-Strauss with respect to understanding of myth, the structural analysis of myth.
So you sent me research and calculating service as well, negative force and specific.
You please.
Okay, because specific is not every other series. But next, very insight is slowly saying from the laws of which are and down it is. So what is a 23 Walker?
They talk it as openly say it is negative force. I am confident on that, right? You can happily write. Okay? Because in fact, 2-3 things they are very vocal. One vocality is the filial relation. That filial and the kin is the primary. Second, they never gave importance to women. That's very clear. Third, incest is a negative force. Now, because you have to understand, sometime we also make a comment that incest is a pre-social social fact. The social fact concept of Victor Turner. Right? Social fact concept of Victor Turner, but we say that it is a pre-social social fact. Now, when we are saying it is a pre-social social fact, in some societies there is a very, very high probability that it is a negative force. That way also we have a deductive logic which is existing there, right? So you can happily write, that's there. Okay. So you see, in the structural analysis of myth, what is the structural analysis of myth in this context? Now, when you talk about the structural analysis of myth, he simply says myth is composed of my themes. Myth is composed of my themes, and any myth is just arrangement and rearrangement of these my themes. Any myth is arrangement or rearrangement of this my themes, and that is where we see the Oedipus complex existing, the Oedipus myth. Now, Oedipus myth is very similar to the story of Ganesha. Now, in Oedipus myth, what happens? It is the, what is happening in Oedipus myth?
So, Ramaja is sexual attraction towards nothing.
In fact, one particular part of the story is very similar to the story of Ganesha. What happens in story of Ganesha? That mother prepares a particular idol and that becomes Ganesha. Father comes and kills, and somehow Shiva ensures that Ganesha is brought back to life by keeping that elephant head. That's one story. But in this particular thing also similar things happen, but there is a role reversal which is happening in Oedipus complex. Right? Son, mother, father. That relation will be there. Right? Now, apart from that, you also see whenever we are talking about myth, myth is fundamentally forming part of a social structure. And myth can also be used as a mechanism of social control. Myth can also be used as a mechanism of social control, and myth is also seen to be becoming part of what? Becoming part of social structure. Right? That is one simple understanding with respect to myth. So whenever they ask you the structural analysis, in fact in 24 we had a question. Ash boy, that particular Cinderella, that particular thing was there. But I don't think it's going to be anymore a question now. In case if they ask, also simply say my themes, arrangement, rearrangement of my themes is this. Now if you are not able to remember any story, simply write Bahubali story and come. One para. That is nothing but myth. What's happening? Mahishmati, Shivagami, Vijjala Deva, Ballala Deva, Prabhas. Prabhas is Bahubali. Arrange, all these are what? My themes, individual structures. You arrange and rearrange this. Part 1 was that only, and part 2 is also same. That means what? All that has been done is what? I shift these blocks around and that becomes my theme. What's happening with Kartika Deepam 1 and Kartika Deepam 2? Yes or no? I regularly watch. I went for the pre-release of Kartika Deepam 2. I'm telling you. Kada. But
or is that word still somebody
doesn't matter. Now, all that I would tell you is, now you see movies. Any movie is what? It has respective my themes. Hero, heroine, villain, some entertainment. Yes? It is either hero following heroine, heroine following hero, villain following heroine, hero following villain. What's happening? Permutation, combination of this. Yes, arrangement and rearrangement. All serials are what? Atta kodalni kottadam, kodal attan revenge teerchukodam. Antena. That is what is happening, right? So you see, this is nothing but a myth. If you understand, it's fine. If you don't, simply mix something and write off. Okay. Next, we also see Edmund Leach. Edmund Leach as part of structuralism. Now, when you look at Edmund Leach as part of structuralism, you understand his core theory was oscillating equilibrium. Now, I'm sorry, my dear, I did not include one word previously in Levi-Strauss. Please write binary opposition. Extremely sorry. Please write binary opposition. He believed in the concept of binary opposition. Right? Then,
yes, sir.
When you look at Edmund Leach believes in the theory of oscillating equilibrium. That means what? None of the structures exist in binary opposition. None of the structures exist in binary opposition. Rather, they keep oscillating between binary opposition and they come to a point of equilibrium. They come to a point of equilibrium. That is what is understood by Edmund Leach. For example, he gives a beautiful example of traffic signal. Traffic signal, one side red, one side green, and what is the oscillating equilibrium? That is yellow. That's oscillating equilibrium. And when he is studying about highland of Burma, when he is studying about the political organization of Burma, He talks about Gumlao. He talks about Gumsha and Sham. Gumlao, Gumsa, Sham. Now Gum, Sha, Gumsha. So what is happening? Gumlao, Sham, and what is in the middle? Gumsa. Right? That means what? Half from there, half from here. That is why we are saying it is oscillating in equilibrium condition. And you can use these theories whenever we are writing on tribe, caste, continuum. Why are we saying tribe is never discrete identity? Caste is never discrete identity. It is oscillating between both. Folk, urban continuum. Little tradition, great tradition. Right? In all of this, what is happening? Two bipolar opposites which are existing, but I see always the society is never perfect tribe, perfect caste, never perfect folk, never perfect urban, never perfect little tradition, never perfect great tradition. I see it to be having a composition, I see it to be having a mixture, it is oscillating. And you can happily use that. You can use Edmund Leach in paper 2, you can use Edmund Leach here, right? You can use Edmund Leach with respect to what? He says, marriage is what? Bundle of rights. Edmund Leach gives the statement that marriage is nothing but bundle of rights. So that is another important dimension which you can bring in with respect to Edmund Leach. Then we see culture materialism. When you look at culture materialism, the concept is given by Marvin Harris. And when we talk about this culture materialism, we see the culture is given importance because of its material significance. Very simple. Very simple it is. Culture is given importance, culture is given the primary position in the society because of its material significance. Cultural materialism. And when we look at this Marvin Harris understanding, he says that there is something called as superstructure, there is something called as structure, and there is something called as infrastructure. When infrastructure changes, there is a change in the structure, there might be a change in superstructure. That is what is the fundamental understanding. There is a primary institution which is the base. And when this primary institution changes, automatically what happens? The secondary institutions also change. You remember, Ralph Linton had classified the social institutions into two. One is the primary institution, the other one is the secondary institution. The primary institution with respect to education, with respect to religion, with respect to political systems, all of this. Right? So Ralph Linton classified the institutions as primary and secondary, social institutions. But otherwise here you observe that Marvin Harris was talking about infrastructure, substructure and superstructure. Right? So that is one dimension that is to be understood. Apart from this, I see a very similar understanding existing with respect to Victor Turner.
So we copy that out like the rest.
Which?
In the
That is Linton. The study of man. Linton's study of man talks about this. And also Linton's study of man talks about status and role. That is definite there. Okay. So you see, when you talk about this cultural materialism, we also see very similar concept being given by whom? Victor Turner. Now what is Victor Turner talking about? Victor Turner talking about communitas. Victor Turner talking about communitas, and again different structures. I would discuss about that when I'm talking about symbolic and interpretative. Apart from that, you can also use Marvin Harris, especially whenever we are talking about Jajmani system.
yeah.
We can use Marvin Harris when we are talking about Jajmani system. What is happening in Jajmani system? The caste is given importance because of its material significance.
So
What is happening in Jajman? Jajman or Yajman is dependent upon whom? Common. And when you look at Jajmani system reinforces caste system to a larger extent. Although it is the primary institution existing in village, it is reinforcing the caste system. But on a tomorrow, whenever we are discussing village studies tomorrow, we will see the debate of Jajmani as an exploitative and Jajmani as a reciprocal institution. We have two different perspectives that are to be seen, and Commander's understanding of changing position of Jajmani because of commercialization of economy. That is the present status or the contemporary view of Jajmani system. I would discuss there. So here what do you see? Cultural materialism, and you see this is also there, and you can also link this with respect to what? You can also link this with respect to the totemism. You can also bring in an example of the sacred groves. You can also bring in an example of sacred groves. You can also bring in an example of totemism. You can also bring in an example of Jajmani system. You can also bring in an example with respect to certain symbolic aspects. Those symbols are important because they have material significance. And symbols are part of culture is symbolic anthropology. But symbols are important because they have material significance is what? Cultural materialism given by Marvin Harris. Right? So that is one basic understanding that you need to remember with respect to this. Slowly from there we start moving to culture personality school. And in the context of culture personality school, this particular school has revolutionized certain dimensions where entry of women anthropologists into the picture. And where we see most of the fieldwork were focused on understanding the women as part of the society. And when you look at this, Ruth Benedict talks about personality influencing culture. Ruth Benedict talks about personality influencing culture. Ruth Benedict also talks about the complex. Ruth Benedict also talks about the Goutham spirits. And Ruth Benedict talks about what? This Apollonian spirits and Dionysian spirits. And use this Goutham spirits whenever you're talking about nature man spirit complex.
Waiting for India.
On India.
She studies Mahler also.
No, she doesn't study Mahler. I'm telling interlinkage. Because when you look at NMS, what is S here? Spirit. What kinds of spirit is this? Benevolent and malevolent. Benevolent is Apollonian. Malevolent is what? Dionysian spirits. That's very simple. Please understand that. Right? Then, apart from that, you see Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead talks about what? Culture influences personality. And she studies, fundamentally what she studies, the sex and temperament. The sex and temperament with respect to whom? American society and Samoan society. American society and Samoan society. And in this context, what is happening? Culture is determining the personality. Personality about what? Personality about the premarital sex. The perception about the premarital sex. The Samoan society had more free perception about premarital sex. And what was the reason? They never considered menstruation as a burden. They were carefree about menstruation as an activity, and apart from that, the premarital sex that was existing there. So that is one aspect. And apart from that, she also studies Arapesh, Mondugmore and Shamboli. Arapesh, Mondugmore and Shamboli. And what is she observing? She is observing that culture influencing personality. Whenever you are writing Margaret Mead, who is the person who is criticizing Margaret Mead?
Derek Freeman.
Derek Freeman.
The body sad. Sadly.
But this fellow is sacrificed his life for criticizing Margaret Mead.
Stand with your body in this sense.
Evarni?
That I
Mead, obviously. See, fundamentally you have to observe. నాకెందుకో ఏదో తేడా కొడితే వీళ్ళిద్దరికి ఏదో జరిగింది. Who? Mead and Freeman. లేకపోతే ఎవడు మొత్తం జీవితాన్ని ధారపోస్తాడు రా, నాకు అర్థం కాదు. On what? Criticizing the field work. Did he get any recognition in the anthropology? Never. Now you have to understand, if Margaret Mead got so much of importance, it fundamentally meant they had some importance in the society, and this fellow wanted to steal it away. But Paul Changman comes to the defense. That's a very big aspect but most of us don't get to express this conflict that is going on in the paper. Although in 23 we had a scope where it was asked, examine the criticism of Malinowski and not Derek Freeman, the Margaret Mead. It was, I think, more of a 20 marker. There you talk about this triangulation, but we could not have that opportunity of talking about the triangulation there. Again, why? Malinowski was there in the picture. Right? Now, you look at Malinowski and diary, the criticism that is done by his wife, అక్కడ కూడా గాయపడ్డ మనసే. కానీ గాయపడ్డ మనసే, you please understand. You have to understand that dimension. There was a wound behind the criticism that was given on Malinowski and diary. Right? That is there. So you see, the Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, other three people are what? Three influencing each other. What is happening in three influencing each other? Ralph Linton, Abraham Gardner, Cora Du Bois. What is happening in Ralph Linton and Abraham Gardner? They are talking about what? They are talking about the basic personality. They are talking about the basic personality, and they are talking about what is the role of primary and secondary institutions. Whereas when you look at Cora Du Bois talks about what? Model personality. Cora Du Bois talks about model personality. Basic personality is what? The average characters. Model personality is what? The most common characters. The most common characters, right? If you look at the character curve that she puts in, this becomes the model personality. That becomes the model personality. That means what? Most common characteristics are what are considered as the model personality, which has been studied by whom? Which has been studied by Cora Du Bois. And we use Cora Du Bois also, as I just mentioned, with respect to sacred complex. We also use Cora Du Bois with respect to what? Sacred complex, right? So all of these are some of the examples with respect to culture, personality, school. Then, and one extension of CPS is what? NCS. Nation Character Studies, right? One extension of this is Nation Character Studies, talking about what? The average character of the nation. And there you see Japan, US, Russia, Germany. We have number of such studies. For example, George Jeffrey talks about these Russian characteristic features. So you talk about that nation character studies, it has an extension of CPS. Now again, a very, very important school, that is symbolic and interpretative. Now when you look at symbolic and interpretative school, you see that all of their understanding is culture is expressed in the form of symbols.
Yeah.
And every symbol has its own interpretation. When we look at symbolic, it is given by Victor Turner. When we look at interpretative, it is given by whom? Clifford Geertz. When you look at Victor Turner's understanding here, Victor Turner talks about ritual symbolism. He talks about ritual symbolism. And Victor Turner also talks about the aspects of a communitas. That means he talks about the phase of liminality. And an extension of liminality is rites de passage. The original concept of rites de passage was given by Arnold van Gennep. Arnold van Gennep has given this particular concept of rites de passage, but you see, the liminality as a phenomena is an extension. What it is believed, it is seen the stage of separation, the stage of transition, and the stage of integration or incorporation. The stage of separation, the stage of transition, and the stage of integration or incorporation. And when you observe the stage of transition, that stage of transition is what is called as liminality. That stage of transition is what is called as communitas. Because communitas is understood as what? A stage where there is no status. A stage where the individual is experiencing a transition. A stage where an individual is seen to be experiencing crisis.
So said, oh, communitas is a phenomenon of various small communal one vicinity to everything as you have.
No, communitas is categorically spoken by Turner in the context of a transitionary phase.
The other thing about there is this communitas where there is not for several things because you want to.
Now here what is happening is communitas is a phase.
Yeah.
And what is the phase characterized with? Phase is characterized with statuslessness. Because of this statuslessness, whatever bonds are existing in the society, that is seen to be developed.
Community is also state.
Communitas is a stage. It's a transitionary stage where the person doesn't have any status. It's in limbo. No difference. It is overall, right? That is why I'm telling you, I'm talking all these three together. When they're talking about communitas, when they're talking about liminality, when they're talking about rites de passage, it's the same. It's the same, right? You will have to talk about simple examples of Endembu society, the Madai tree, right? The sap milk of the Madai tree was considered and compared with the fertility of the women, the puberty ritual there. And Mukanda ceremony is what? Mukanda ceremony is the circumcision of the male when the male attains the stage of puberty. Right? So that is what is, both of them are what? Both of them are communitas, both of them are liminality, both of them are rites de passage. So that is one simple understanding with respect to Victor Turner. Right? Victor Turner majorly talks about what? Ritual symbolism. Major focus is on symbols. Now, if you want to still see, he says some of the symbols are instrumental in nature. Some of the symbols are instrumental in nature. Now, for example, you see this Mangal Sutra. Mangal Sutra is an instrumental symbol. Why? Because just by looking at that particular symbol, you are able to talk about the status of the individual.
Yes.
Yes. Now you see the sindoor here. Now that is what? That is an instrumental symbol. You see a cross in the around your neck. That is an instrumental symbol. So any instrumental symbol is what? That symbol which is enabling you to identify the status of the individual just by the appearance of that symbol. Then when you look at Gates, Gates says symbols are vehicles of culture. Symbols are vehicles of culture. Victor Turner says what? Symbols are means of social transformation. Symbols are means of social transformation as stated by whom? As stated by Victor Turner. But whereas when you look at this dimension of Clifford Geertz talks about what? Symbols are vehicles of culture. Symbols are vehicles of culture. And he talks about what? Interpretative. And he uses what? He uses a thick description. He uses contextual approach. And that is where he studies Balinese cockfights. That is where he studies the Balinese cockfights. The Balinese cockfight studied by Clifford Geertz. Right? So that is another important dimension that you need to understand here. And he has different interpretation of Balinese cockfight. It's a symbol of revenge. It's a symbol of masculinity. It is a symbol which has double meaning. It is a symbol which is promoting or taking revenge. It is a symbol which is talking about choosing a particular mate. Different interpretations were given with respect to Balinese cockfight. And you also remember Clifford Geertz also spoke about religion. Yesterday we discussed about symbolic approach to religion, where religion is nothing but set of symbols. Set of beliefs is defined by whom? Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim defines it as set of beliefs, but this person defines it as what? Set of symbols. So that is another very, very important dimension that you need to understand with respect to Geertz. Now, if you want to just see the third person, D.M. Snyder. D.M. Snyder talks about taxonomical approach. D.M. Snyder talks about the taxonomical approach. What does that person mean? That person means that you have multiple cultural institutions existing, and each institution has a symbol which is representing that institution. Each institution has a symbol which is representing that institution. That is why we say taxonomical. Taxonomy is what? Basic classification, we say. Yes, so that is what is given by D.M. Snyder. D.M. Snyder also studies about what? D.M. Snyder also studies about kinship. American relation. Right? D.M. Snyder also studied about the American relation and the kinship in the American society. That is another important dimension that you need to understand. Then very, very important dimension is with respect to the neo-evolutionist. And when you look at neo-evolutionists believed that any culture is multilinear. Any culture is universal. Any culture is multilinear, any culture is universal. And in this we have four different thinkers, and we see G.V. Child. And G.V. Child talks about what? Neolithic revolution. And G.V. Child talks about what? How did the lithic cultures evolve? How did the lithic cultures evolve? And he talks about what? He talks about universal evolution. He talks about universal evolution. Now, whereas when you look at Julian H. Stewart categorically talks about culture ecology approach. Culture ecology approach, where he sees that ecology or environment influences culture. And what did he perceive? he perceived that for every environment there are different culture types which are seen to be existing. And when you see that, it has a cultural process which is seen to be existing, and depending upon the environment, what do you see? You see that the cultural process changes, the cultural traits changes, and not only that, the cultural climax also changes. So what is happening? The cultural pattern changes, the cultural type changes, the cultural process changes, and the cultural climax also changes along with the change in the cultural traits. All of these are to be changing with the change in environment. Whenever we see a change in environment, we have this particular change happening here. So that is one simple understanding with respect to Julian H. Stewart. Always use Julian H. Stewart in 9.7. Don't come out of the exam hall without using it. This year we are seeing coming back of 9.7. Is sal likh ke le lena, you take a micro Xerox to exam hall on 9.7. Or if there is no question on 9.7 on record, I'm telling you, I will stop teaching anthropology from that day. वो तो पक्का है. Right, 9.7 we have a question which is coming, right? Then we have Leslie Alvin White, and where we see Leslie Alvin White talks about what? When you talk about this Leslie Alvin White, you see Leslie Alvin White talks about culture energy approach, where he says culture is a resultant of energy and the technology that is available. That means you see that the respective culture is seen to be evolving with the presence of energy and technology. And he also talks about a beautiful concept of culturology. Beautiful concept of culturology, where he talks about the science of culture. Culturology is the science of culture. And whenever you are talking about culture and human being or culture and primate, please bring in Leslie Alvin White's understanding of culturology. You don't need to know what is culturology, simply like Leslie Alvin White's understanding of culturology has enabled us to understand what is the evolution of culture in the human societies. Very simple. And automatically what happens? Trust me, that is where we see the transition for or getting an extra 1 mark there. That is very, very important. Okay? So you see, this is another important dimension that you'll have to write whenever you're talking about this.
Lithic cultures.
Lithic cultures. And when you look at the fourth one, that is with respect to specific evolution and general evolution. The specific evolution and general evolution given by Shawlins and Service. Shawlins and Service. Now, when you talk about this, I also told you this approach is also what is called as the biocultural approach. Yesterday we discussed. Whenever we are writing upon 1.4, whenever we are writing on 9.7, whenever we are writing on 9.8, whenever we are writing on 10th chapter secular trends, use biocultural approach, which is given by whom? Shawlins and Service. Right? So that is one fundamental dimension that you have to understand with respect to neo-evolutionist school. Then cognitive, right? Nobody asks it. Why? They say it is all mental. Right? Ante kada, lopal undi. When it is inside, should we write? No, so they don't ask. Okay, so you see, culture is a mental construct. Culture is mental construct given by whom? Stephen A. Tyler, Harold C. Conklin. Given by whom? Stephen A. Tyler and Harold C. Conklin talks about this. And when you look at Stephen A. Tyler compares the Koya society and the American society. And Koya society and American society in the context of what? In the context of the bamboos, in the context of snow or manchu, or in the context of the relation with the cousin. Right? Different kinds of words, different kinds of kinship terminologies used with respect to American society and the Koya society. And when you look at Harold C. Conklin talks about the color perception. Harold C. Conklin talks about the color perception of various plants. Color perception of various plants. And what is the core concept of cognitive anthropology? Cognitive anthropology says that everything is a mental construct. It is manifested within. And you see, Gestalt's understanding of psychological structures. Where was this supposed to be used? Whenever, if you want to use something extra in structuralism, in the context of structuralism, structuralism talks about Gestalt's the mental structures. He says every thought has a pattern. Every thought has a pattern, every thought has a mental structure which is existing, and from there we see that society is thought out to be what? In binary opposition. That becomes the premise for Levi-Strauss structuralism. That becomes the premise for Levi-Strauss structuralism, that is Gestalt's understanding. If you don't want to talk about this, you can also talk about the Sigmund Freud's understanding of psychological approach. Because Sigmund Freud's psychological approach is very close to cognitive anthropology. And whatever is perceived within is what is understood as culture. Is what is understood as culture. And you also see this is what is called as ethnoscience. This is what is called as ethnoscience. Cognitive anthropology is also called as ethnoscience. Cognitive anthropology is also called as a new ethnography. New ethnography. Bring in a broader perspectives here, ethnoscience and ethnography. Right? So that is another important dimension that you will have to remember with respect to the cognitive anthropology. With this, we come to an end of 6th chapter. Right? What are we doing? We are simply keeping 6th in the center and throwing the thinkers. Right? This is bare minimum. If you are able to do this much in your answer sheet, you have decent thinker knowledge. And here, whatever we are doing is what? Interlinkage. A 7th chapter, language. When you look at language, one dimension that you have to understand is there are different branches of linguistic anthropology. Just know one line on each of this. One particular thing is historical linguistics, descriptive linguistics, ethno-linguistics, and socio-linguistics. Historic linguistics, descriptive linguistics, ethno-linguistics, and socio-linguistics. Now, when you look at this historic linguistics, it is talking about the history of the language. It is talking about the history of the language. Now, when you look at descriptive linguistics, it is talking about the structure of the language. When you're talking about ethno-linguistics, it is talking about the relation between language and culture, because wherever we have this word ethno is meaning what? Ethno is meaning culture. And ethno-linguistics, and whenever we are talking about the social linguistics, it is talking about the relation between the language and society. It is talking about the relation between the language and the society. That is another important understanding that you need to have with respect to branches of language. Then apart from that, you also have origin theories of language. Now when you look at the origin theories of language could be biological theories. Origin theories of language could be cultural theories. Right? When you talk about origin theories, one, the tool making source theory. Tool making source theory. The other one is genetic source theory. The other one is a natural sound source. And what is happening in tool making theory? You see, because of the emergence of tool, the cognitive capacity increasing and automatically development of some regions like Wernicke's and Broca's area. And because of the development of Wernicke's and Broca's area, we see the emergence of language happening in the society. Apart from that, when you look at genetic source, I told you already we have something called as FOXP2 gene. FOXP2 gene, which is the source for emergence of language. Then in the context of natural sound source theory, you have a number of aspects like epiglottis, emergence of epiglottis. Then we have nasal capacity. Because of all of these which are present in the human physiology, we see the emergence of language. Then when you look at the cultural aspects here, one is divine theory. One is the divine theory. Then apart from that, we also have imitation hypothesis. Imitation hypothesis. And the third one is a necessity hypothesis. Just remember these names. You can write whatever you feel like writing under it. It's there. Right? So you see divine theory, imitation hypothesis, and necessity hypothesis. Then apart from that, you see any dynamic question in 7th chapter, you deal with this perspective that language will influence culture, culture will influence language. Language influences culture, culture influences language. This is what a linguistic determinism. This is what? Cultural determinism. And both of them combined together, it becomes a linguistic relativism. And most of you will think Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is linguistic relativism. No. Sapir and Whorf is very clear. It is linguistic determinism. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is linguistic determinism. Why? Sapir and Whorf perceive that language is a force which coerces the human thought. ఈ లైన్ పడాల్సిందే. Language is a force which coerces the human thought. What is the evidence for this? The evidence for this is learning a different language becomes very difficult. Learning a different language becomes very difficult. That is why we see that what is seen to be happening, language is a force which is coercing the human thought. So that is another very, very important dimension with respect to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And language, and here one dimension that I keep talking about, the William Ludd's understanding of double speak. When we see double speak, it is simple that it is fundamentally how language is influencing culture. One simple understanding is what? Strategic restructuring. Strategic restructuring is nothing but what? Layoff. Right? Strategic restructuring is nothing but what? Layoff. Or today we see Zomato delivery executives. We don't see delivery boys. Why? As soon as we say executive, what is happening to the culture? We start respecting.
What?
We start respecting. So what is happening here? How is language influencing culture? And that is what is seen by William Ludd's understanding of double speak. William Ludd's, L-U-T-Z. William Ludd's understanding of double speak, right? So that is one simple understanding with respect to the language chapter, right? And always remember, my dear, if you don't know anything in language chapter, right? If you're not understanding the question, keep the subheading and write language influencing culture, culture influencing language, and the social context of language. Automatically answer will be there. That fellow will search, right? Not an issue. Because this chapter sometimes can become very troublesome. And in that context, use this particular logic and things will become easy in that particular chapter. So with this, we come to an end of socio-cultural anthropology. We have done till 8th chapter. Yes?
Good.
Anything you want me to cover again? In socio-cultural things are clear? Yes. Quickly, we have just revised. And we have also seen some mandatory dimensions to be infused wherever it is required. Okay? Very good. Now we will start with physical anthropology. Right? Now when you talk about this physical anthro, first thing that we see is with respect to man-family studies. When you look at man-family studies, we see the qualitative characters and a quantitative characters. And when you look at this qualitative characters, 1 is gene level, 2 is DNA level, 3 is chromosomal level, 4 is a protein levels. 1 is gene level, DNA level, chromosomal level, and protein level. Now, when you look at this gene level, that is where we have pedigree analysis. That is where we have pedigree analysis. At DNA level, that is where we have recombinant DNA technology. At chromosomal level, that is where we have chromosomal analysis, and that is where we have karyotype analysis. And when you look at protein level, at the level of enzymes, we have biochemical methods. At the base of antigen and antibody, we have immunological methods. And whereas when you look at quantitative characteristic features, the quantitative genetics, this is where we have twin studies, co-twin studies, and foster child studies. That means Quantitative characteristic features are those which are talking about both genetic and environmental, but qualitative is only talking about the genetic characteristic features. That means those characters which are impacted by only genes is what is seen with respect to that. Simple understanding, what is pedigree analysis? Pedigree analysis is what is the inheritance pattern of disease. What is the inheritance pattern of disease across different generations, and what is the simple application of this genetic counseling. When you look at rDNA technology, you directly use it in applied human genetics in 12th chapter. When you go and refer the last 3 lines of 12th chapter, applied human genetics, that is where you have rDNA technology and utilize all of those. rDNA is nothing but recombinant and getting the desired outcome. And when you look at chromosomal analysis and karyotype analysis, now what is happening here? In the chromosomal analysis, what are we doing? We are fundamentally talking about the chromosomal banding technique. That could be C banding, G banding, Q banding, R banding, like different kinds of banding techniques. And what is the application of chromosomal analysis and chromosomal banding technique? To understand the structural abnormalities of 9.4. If you have to understand the structural abnormalities, you will have to talk about the banding technique. But if you want to understand the numerical abnormalities, we will have to talk about the karyotype analysis. In karyotype analysis, what is happening? Using colchicine, we are arresting the process of cell division. We are arresting the process of cell division with respect to metaphase. Right, using colchicine, we are arresting at metaphase, and at metaphase, what are we doing? We are observing and constructing what? Constructing something called as ideogram. And when you look at this construction of ideogram, what is this ideogram? Ideogram is a template where you are arranging the chromosomes according to the number from 1 till 22, and along with which you also have, if it is X and Y, it is what? The sex chromosome, that is the 23rd pair.
So after karyotyping, do you banding happens?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. For both of them, I need arresting. Because where is the clear picture of chromosome is seen? In cell division, it is only at the metaphase. Because I see before longitudinal splitting that happens as part of your anaphase, metaphase, telophase, all of that, I see what is happening. The centromeres and the spindle fibers are holding them at the central position. And when it is holding them at the central position, this is where I am observing, and that is where I am seeing all the chromatids consolidating, decongesting itself and forming into a fresh chromosome. And that is where I get a real picture of the chromosome. Right? And if I want, I can band this here. If I want, I can construct ideogram. Both I can undertake simultaneously if I wish to also, because in karyotype analysis, it is got to do only with number. For suppose if I am talking about, say, Cry-to-Shat syndrome, some issue will be there in the 5th chromosome. If I am talking about Down syndrome, some issue in the 21st chromosome. So that means what is happening here? Number. Numerical aberrations through karyotype, structural aberrations through chromosomal analysis, right? So that is another simple understanding. Then when you see biochemical methods, in the biochemical methods, what is observed? You see that one gene, one enzyme hypothesis. This is given by whom? This is given by Beadle and Tantum. This is given by Beadle and Tantum, where one gene, one enzyme hypothesis is existing. And what's happening here? If there is a change in this gene, you see change in enzyme function. And whenever there is a change in enzyme function, there is a change in biochemical method. There is a change in biochemical method. To understand this gene, we are seeing biochemical methods. That could be with respect to electrophoresis, right? That could be with respect to precipitation test. Different kinds of testing mechanisms are there. In immunological methods, what are we having? In immunological method, we are observing the interaction between antigen and antibody. Antigen and antibody, because we know any change in gene will change the structure of antigen and antibody. Yes, that's antibody structure, and you see we have heavy chains and light chains, and the heavy chains and light chains are going to be affected by the genes.
So electrophoresis, how exactly, we get see in Bundy and Viking to that.
Which one?
So things.
In electrophoresis, you please understand, electrophoresis is to observe any protein structure. Now the protein structure could be what? Could be enzyme. The protein structure could be what? Antigen, antibody. Anything I can see. Now in electrophoresis, what happens? Whole of the process is very different. But just understand for now that through electrophoresis, I can study any protein structure. There we have southern blotting, northern blotting. All that business is very different, right? Now here, when we look at this immunological aspects, what are we having? We are understanding that a change in the gene will change the structure of the antibody. And to understand that, we are going for immunological method, right? An immunological method, one simple immunological method is what? ELISA kit testing process. So that is one. Now, when you look at quantitative genetics, where we are observing these dimensions of twin studies, co-twin studies, and foster child studies, you please understand here we are understanding a concept called as heritability. And heritability is talking about what? The variation that is caused due to genes divided by the variation caused due to the total factors. That is heritability. That means Vg by Vg plus Ve. It is trying to understand what is the role of genetic factors vis-a-vis the role of environmental factors in bringing in a change in a particular trait of an individual.
You said CE by PG plus CE garnering.
Edma?
PE by PG plus PE are same.
Dinka? Yen?
PE determinant. So PE by PG plus PE.
No, we don't have anything. Now that is where you see, suppose if you want to apply them, then that is where you see the application happening in eugenics, euthenics, euphenics. When I'm talking about genes, it is eugenics. That is where I see VG. If I'm talking about euthenics, that is where I see VE. Euphenics, I see VG plus V. That is talking about welfare genetics. Branch of welfare genetics in biomedical anthropology is these three today. Right? Now, if you don't want to do this, if you want even more complex, which I don't want to give you at this stage, is something called as ACE model. Right? We will have a lot of formulas here. I don't want to discuss. Right? It will unnecessarily create a problem. Right? If I have to just give you a sample of ACE model formula, now it will be something like what? Is equals to A plus C. And monozygote minus frequency of dizygote is equals to A by 2. అవసరమైనంత వద్దు.
We thought to tell you one extra questions for either film just studies not so.
ఏది స్టడీస్ రాస్తే సరిపోద్ది. But if you would have seen this like 2 months before, I'd have had an opportunity to give you equations. Leave now. There's no point. You just hit it with the concept, not an issue at all. Because anyway, 95% does not remember AC equation. So you can be safe. Okay. Adi rayali. That is bare minimum, my dear. A very simple equation. In fact, I have replaced all ACE model with this. Either of those I have to write. So yeah, if I'm skipping ACE, I will definitely have to write this. Wo to pakka hai. Because I can never write twin, co-twin and foster without this word. And if I'm writing this word, I can never write it without this equation. Last year we had heritability factors as a 10 marker. Total factors lo how much is the genes contributing. That's it. That is heritability. Okay. Then in this just write 2-3 case studies. Likh lo. One case study of Claude Butchard. Claude Butchard studies obesity genes. Claude Butchard studies obesity genes. Obesity genes. And concludes that obesity is determined by genes, not environment. And concludes that obesity is determined by genes, not environment. Next, one more study. Eric Turkheimer. Studies IQ. And observes IQ is determined by genes in rich families. IQ is determined by genes in rich families. And it is determined by environment in poor families. And it is determined by environment in poor families. These two are sufficient. I don't want to talk about jail hopper. There are so many. Caspi et al., Bradshaw. Two kafi hai. Wherever you want to use them. Right? You can use them in growth and development chapter also. You can use them in growth and development chapter also, where you see different factors affecting growth and development. That could also be used there. Right? Then, apart from that, one aspect is with respect to that. Okay. Then, one more small classification that you can remember is with respect to lethal genes. It is based on one classification based on lethality, one classification based on expression. This could be divided as lethal, semi-lethal, and sublethal. And when you talk about semi-lethal or lethal, the individual dies before birth. The individual dies before birth. In sublethal, the individual dies in early infancy. In semi-lethal, the individual dies after reproductive age. After reproductive age. One simple example of semi-lethal could be Down syndrome.
Huntington.
Huntington also. Down syndrome is also there. And when you talk about sublethal, it is Patau. Sublethal, it is Patau's syndrome. Right? Now, depending upon the expression, one is the dominant lethal, the other one is the recessive, the other one is conditional lethal.
Yeah.
And when we talk about this dominant, in dominant also we have sublethal and semi-lethal. Sublethal and semi-lethal. In dominant semi-lethal, that is where you have Huntington disease. Huntington chorea is dominant semi-lethal. And dominant sublethal is epilepsia. Epilepsia, dominant sublethal. A recessive sublethal. A recessive sublethal, simple example could be thalassemia. Thalassemia. And recessive semi-lethal could be hemophilia. Recessive semi-lethal could be hemophilia. And conditional lethality is with respect to G6PD deficiency. Conditional lethality is with respect to G6PD deficiency. Is this clear? Right? So Huntington chorea is more or less semi, but if I want to make it a little more specific, dominant semi. Right? Then just understand, whenever they ask you applied human genetics or applications of biotechnology or applications of rDNA technology, we are going to have question this year on this. Right? This year we are having a question on rDNA biotech applications, right? Now here the simple structure that I always keep telling is 1 in forensic, 2 in evolutionary, 3 in medical, 4 other sectors. In forensic, it is simple what I can talk about paternity diagnosis. Yes. In forensic, I can talk about identifying the disaster victims. In forensic, I can talk about identifying disaster victims. In forensic, I can talk about the crime reconstruction. Crime reconstruction. In evolutionary studies, you look at what is the aspect of genetic diversity. You see the aspects of linkages across stages of evolution. For example, you see that 4% of the genes being similar across the process of evolution. Across the process of evolution, you can fundamentally debunk the understanding of Denisovans, right? Then apart from that, you can also talk about understanding whether Aryan invasion theory really is relevant or not. Because that is where we have our DNA studies coming into the picture, right? And that is where we see our DNA technology, our DNA studies giving a conclusive remarks on it. Now, when we look at the medical aspects, in the medical aspects, you see it is with respect to diagnosis. And diagnosis is what? DNA probe, right? Then we also see the aspects with respect to vaccines. Then we also see aspects with respect to genetic counseling. We also see aspects with respect to gene mapping in medical. Then in the context of others, it could be what? Industrial applications, or it could be agricultural applications, like the genetically modified crops, transgenic animals, and production of beverages. That's more of an industrial application that is seen to be existing. So you see that this could be a multi-purpose table which you can definitely keep in mind and write it. Insulin, we write it here. Insulin, hepatitis B, that's here. You want, you can also write there. Right? So that is another important dimension. Next, when you see another important dimension is Mendelian versus non-Mendelian. When you talk about Mendelian, you see it is talking about what? Law of unit factor. It is talking about what? Law of dominance. It is talking about what? Law of segregation. It is talking about what? Law of independent assortment. And what is the example for Mendelian genetics is very simple, that is ABO blood group. One simple understanding is ABO blood group becomes an example of Mendelian genetics. But in the similar manner, we have number of non-Mendelian characteristic features which are seen to be existing. One is incomplete dominance and codominance. One is incomplete dominance and codominance. The other one is the polygenic inheritance. Now, when we talk about polygenic inheritance, it is nothing but multiple genes impacting one particular trait. Multiple genes impacting one particular trait, polygenic inheritance. The third aspect is pleiotropy. The third aspect is pleiotropy, where one gene impacting multiple traits. Where one gene impacting multiple traits. The third or the fourth aspect is with respect to genetic linkage. The fourth aspect is with respect to genetic linkage, right? Now, one classic example of this is the HLA alleles. HLA alleles is a simple example of genetic linkage. And the other aspect is we have epigenetics. Epigenetics is an exemption to non-Mendelian characteristic feature. That means what? It is categorically talking about how our non-genetic factors impacting the genetic expression? How are non-genetic factors impacting the genetic expression?
What like you said,
HLA alleles, human leukocyte,
wow.
9.6. Like that we have HLA, B, C, D, DR.
Or the cook this is Mendelian is father.
No, it doesn't follow Mendel. Multiple allelism means only non-Mendelian. Please understand that, right? Because that fellow only talks about what? Unit factor. So different expression should not be there at all. It's common, right? Then epigenetics is all about what? How are non-genetic factors impacting genetic factors? For example, impact of smoking, impact of alcohol. How are they impacting the other characteristic features? Then you have a genetic polymorphism.
This is special.
You have genetic polymorphism. Right, that is another exception and that is another non-Mendelian characteristic feature. Right, and the other one that you have with respect to this is gene imprinting. Gene imprinting. One is epigenetics, genetic polymorphism, and gene imprinting. Now, when you talk about this genetic polymorphism, you see that there are different types of polymorphism. One, at the cell surface level. Two, at chromosomal level. Three, at the gene product level. One is at cell surface level, one is chromosomal level, and the other one is gene product level. Now, when you look at cell surface level, it is very simple. That is RBC and ABO antigens. RBC and ABO antigens. Now, when you look at chromosomal levels, again, it is very simple. For example, you talk about Down syndrome, and the other name or other form of it present is what? Robertsonian dislocation. Robertsonian dislocation is also a kind of Down syndrome. What is happening in Robertsonian dislocation? The chromosome number 14 and chromosome number 21 are seen to be dislocated. That means when you look at the structural dislocation that is seen to be happening, for suppose if this is chromosomal 14 and if this is 21, we see that after Robertsonian dislocation, the structure will become something like this. That means this is 14, and you see 21 coming beneath 14, and there is only one sister chromatid existing as part of 21. So this is what is called as, you see this being dislocated here. So that is what is understood as Robertsonian dislocation, which is nothing but again a form of Down syndrome. Then when you look at gene product level, the gene product level could be what? G6PD. The gene product could be what? Haptoglobins. You see haptoglobins present in your 9.6 chapter. All of your 9.6 chapter is gene product level. Haptoglobins, transferins, G6PD. All of these are what? Gene product level. Then apart from that, one common thing that we keep seeing is genetic polymorphism and interplay with selection. When we look at this genetic polymorphism and interplay with selection, we see three again. One is permanent, or this could also be called as the normalizing or permanent, or stabilizing. Now these three are the same. And when you talk about this, what is happening, you see, it is the intermediate characteristic features are selected. Now for suppose if this is the population, these are the traits which are selected. Those are the traits which are selected. This is gene frequency and this is the phenotype which is occurring. And the selected characteristic features are what? These. And what is happening to the extreme ones? The extreme characters are extinct. The extreme characters are extinct. Now when you look at the second one, that is the transient stage. That is a transient polymorphism, or this could also be called as the directional polymorphism. Now here one simple example is what? You see the extreme characters are selected. Extreme characters are selected, and a simple example is industrial melanism. That is one example. Apart from that, we also have selection of HBE. When you look at selection of HBE, what is happening? You see, when there were thick forest which was existing, after the cleaning of thick forest, we slowly start seeing the mosquito population increasing. And because of the mosquito population increasing, what do we see? HBE was selected by the nature because this was more malaria resistant. That, what is that? Betullaria insect. Now because of industrial activity, lot of pollution, what happened? This insect's color changes. And that means what are we seeing? We are not looking at the average character being selected, but extreme character selected, right? And as the insect started progressing, you could find that the color of the insect was that, which was resultant of the industrialization process, right? So HBE, again, because in general, what is the common character that is existing? HBA. If HBE or HBS or HBC is being selected, all these are what? Transient systems. All these are transient systems. And apart from that, and the last one is African population. HBE, HBC. Mediterranean, in India, Central Indian tribes. Central Indian tribes, HBS. Right? That is why, because of so much of variability in HB system, we try to use MN system and KID system in Africa. But although we don't understand MN system and KID system, but we see because of that variability. I don't find an average character existing in Africa because of the temperature, because of the diversity that is existing there. Okay. So when you look at balanced polymorphism, you see that this is also understood as a heterozygous polymorphism. And when you look at this heterozygous polymorphism, a simple understanding here is, this is how the selection is. That this is HBA, HBA, this is HBS, HBS, but what is more selected? HBA, HBS, HBA, HBS. Why? Because you have to understand heterozygosity is nothing but hybrid vigor. Now you would have studied about something called as the impact of consanguinal and non-consanguinal marriages. In non-consanguinal marriages, it is resulting in what? Heterozygosity. Heterozygosity is resulting in what? Hybrid vigor. That means stronger selection. In consanguineous marriages are those marriages which are happening with common ancestor. And there what is seen to be happening, we see a lot of probability existing for homozygous condition. And homozygous condition means expression of recessive disorders. And sickle cell anemia is a kind of recessive disorder. And apart from that, because of which we see there is something called as inbreeding depression. These words to be used there. Whenever you are writing consanguineous and non-consanguineous, hybrid vigor, non-consanguineous, inbreeding depression, consanguineous, and you also see homozygosity existing. But if you look at these conditions over a long term, the consanguineous which is resulting in homozygous condition can become a stabilizing condition. That means it will slowly start turning into an advantageous position, because you see all other characters are being eliminated. Only this homozygous condition is going to exist there.
But that will still increase genetic load.
That might increase genetic load. I'm not very sure.
And what I'm trying to do, population is not large enough. Where it turn up?
Yes, obviously. But for me, always the consideration is Mendelian. For me, always the condition is Mendelian. In Mendelian, what is happening? Random mating is a characteristic feature. And when I slowly start talking about the syndesmian population, forget. Types of Mendelian population, simply remember Mendelian population is that population which has probability of random mating mass. Right? So So you see the permanent, transient and balanced polymorphism, and this is how it is happening here. Okay. What is gene imprinting? Simple understanding. If these two are genes, this has this expression, this has this expression. If this gene is blocking the expression of the other, this is gene imprinting, imposing the expression. Impinging the expression is what is called as gene imprinting. And that is where we see the examples of what? Prader-Willi syndrome and Engelmann's syndrome.
Selective methylation process will add selective methylation process.
Don't write the process. Just write there can be three ways. What is that? One is demethylation is one. Or sorry, hypermethylation is one. Histone modification is one. Non-coding proteins. These three are the methods of gene imprint. Right? Hypermethylation, histone modification, and non-coding proteins. Non-coding proteins.
Coding proteins.
Histone modification. Just to increase the point, we will have non-coding proteins. Right? But otherwise, it could be put under histone modification. So what's happening? These three are the methods or the reasons for gene imprinting. Right? So that is one simple understanding. An example is what? Prader-Willi syndrome and Engelmann's syndrome. That is another important dimension that you need to understand here. If you want, if you can't remember this, simply write Cry-do-Chat as an example for gene imprinting. Cry-do-Chat is an example of gene imprinting.
And you stick a lot on the column.
What is happening is you see P-type arm and P and Q arms. Now what happens is you see there is only half of this arm which is existing. That means we see mostly it is P and Q minus. So the expression of Q is blocked by P. Uddu. Right? So simply remember, if you can't remember Prader-Willi, if you can't remember Engelmann's, you simply write Cry-do-Chat. Wo bhi chalega. That is also another kind of example for gene imprinting. Okay? So that is another important dimension that you need to understand. Okay? Right? Then again simple, I think yesterday I gave you one simple flow chart on what? Forces of evolution. In the forces of evolution, what did we see? We have seen systemic forces and dispersive forces. I told you Falconer. Babu, write this fellow's name somewhere. If you're having some question from 9.1 to 9.3, simply write this fellow's name. Who? Falconer. And what is the book? Introduction of Quantitative Genetics. Yesterday, I think I told theory of quantitative genetics. Please rectify it as Introduction of Quantitative Genetics. Falconer has written this particular book, and in that he talks about systemic forces and dispersive forces. And systemic forces are three. One, a mutation, migration, selection. And dispersive forces are two, inbreeding and genetic drift. Inbreeding and genetic drift. Right? So that is another important dimension that you need to remember with respect to that particular line. Right? Then apart from that, you also see there are different kinds of genetic load. There are different kinds of genetic load.
Check.
What is this different kinds of genetic load which is existing?
Mutate.
What is load? You simply see some burden where you see the average fitness is reduced. The average fitness is reduced. That's what we represent like this. That if this is x naught and if this is x, what is the load? X minus x naught. That is load representation. And we see we have different kinds of loads. 4. 1. Segregational load. Incompatibility load. A mutational load. And migrational load. Right? Segregational load, incompatibility load, a mutational load, and migrational load. Segregational load, sickle cell anemia. Simple. Babu, please draw inheritance chart. Please draw inheritance chart. What is inheritance chart?
Pedigree.
not pedigree. But suppose if I am saying this is HBA, HBS, this is one genotype, this is one genotype. On the combination I see 1,
So is it first?
2, 1, 2. And what's happening? This fellow will combine with this, this fellow will combine with this, this fellow will combine with this, this fellow will combine with this. And what's happening here? HBA, 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 HBS, HBA, HBS, HBS, HBS. This is segregational load. You're writing segregational load, but you're not showing segregational load. Right? ఏం అర్థం కాకపోతే రెండు సున్నాలు పెట్టి ఊరికే దీన్ని అతికిచ్చు అయిపోద్ది. ఎగ్జామినర్ వాంట్స్ దట్. అలా రెండు గీతలు చూడాలి ఏదైనా కానీ. బికాజ్ none of us, in fact I can tell you 95% don't use inheritance charts. Any question on genetics, simply you get a scope, don't get a scope, keep a dabba aside and draw inheritance chart and come. I can bet upon examiner will give you at least 0.5 extra and do like this to your paper. I'm not joking. కొన్ని అలాంటివి ఉంటాయి. The problem with anthropology is what? Non-anthropologist studies anthropology. But who is evaluating? Anthropologist is evaluating. So be very clear, right? So that is one dimension that you have to understand. That is segregational, incompatibility, mutational. What is incompatibility? Erythroblastosis fetalis. Mutational load is what? You talk about hemophilia. Or you can simply say X-linked disorder. Hemophilia is nothing but X-linked disorder. Then apart from that, migrational load. But I can put it here, no? I can put it here, right? Rendo akkada enduko? I want to use it here.
Only one mutation.
One mutation. See, single point mutation. Ab manlo I can use sickle cell anemia also here. Why? Because it is single point mutation. But I don't want to exploit all of that because segregational for sickle cell anemia looks beautiful. My wish is that I will overact there by showing this. But if I use of sickle cell anemia here in mutation, what will I show in mutation? Will I show that valine being replaced there? I can't. Anta amino acid relation నాకు లేదు. Right? And definitely use one person called H.J. Muller. H.J. Muller categorically studies on mutational load. H.J. Muller, right? Then migrational load, it is purely because of what? When the carrying capacity is exceeded. When the carrying capacity of the region is exceeded, it is resulting in migrational load. Yes, that means if it can carry 100 but it is having 110. What is it? The 10 is load. Right? The 10 is additional load which is existing there. So that is another simple understanding with respect to genetic load. Right? Now I don't think I'll have to talk about 9.4. But 9.4 I will add one small dimension to you, that whenever you're writing chromosomal abnormalities, Babu, again this year we have a question. Akka, again on camera. No question, I will stop teaching anthropology.
So what?
Akka hai wo, right? Arey, anthropology is
Perfect.
ante, right? So when you look at chromosomal abnormalities, any question, one thing that you will have to draw is inheritance chart. Inheritance chart any given day, right? Now I keep telling to the candidates, please stop drawing this awkward diagrams there. Already diagram is abnormal. What will you show abnormality in this abnormal diagram? Don't. I keep telling. Right? So in that context, what is one fundamental dimension that you will have to remember is draw inheritance chart. How will you draw inheritance chart? If it is sex-linked chromosome or if it is sex chromosome abnormality, simply show XX is 1, 0 in 1, XY separately if you want. Now what will happen? This will become triple X. This will become XXY. This will become XO. And this will become YO.
This kingdom.
All chromosomal, sex-related chromosomal abnormalities are there. Klinefelter is there. Super female is there. Klinefelter is not there, sorry.
Super male.
Right? You have Turner syndrome. And this is what?
Skeletized. Where I
Whole Andrick syndrome.
it's in my watching episodes. And I go well and instead of watching it.
That instead abortion is that see, most of these abnormalities will inevitably have miscarriages. But what is the syndrome? Whole Andrick syndrome. You look at that whole Andrick. Why? Only Y chromosome is existing in that fellow. So that is why we are calling it as whole Andrick syndrome. Right? One inheritance chart compulsory. If it is 21, if it is, what is that? Pathouse, Edwards, Down. 13, 18, 21. And Cry-Do chart is what? 5th chromosome. If it is Turner syndrome, it is what? XO. If it is Klinefelter syndrome, it is?
Sex what?
XXY. Turner female or male?
Trash. Female.
Female. Klinefelter? Male. Don't change it. Right? So that is there. Anyway, super female, super male. And for hermaphrodites, you can't draw inheritance chart. What is hermaphrodite? Intersex. Where the sex is not. What is hermaphrodite or what is intersex? Their physiological genitalia is something different from their sex chromosomes. There is no combination there. They might be having male related chromosomes, but they might be having some incidence of female genitalia. Those are hermaphrodites.
Sublime creator, extinct and creator, Latin and Chessic.
No. Intersex is hermaphrodites. That means you cannot say what is the sex. In Klinefelter, what am I telling you? Male, female, I know the sex. But what is happening? Suppressed characteristics. In Turner, I see what is rudimentary ovaries in Turner. Why rudimentary ovaries in Turner? Because it is suppressed female character. But when I look at Klinefelter, what is happening? Same rudimentary testis. Yes, sometimes I also see gynecomastia. Probable. So that means what is happening? Something is suppressed, something is profuse. That is there. I know this. Here I can't tell what is the sex. That is why we are calling it as hermaphrodites or intersex. There, simply remember one formula. There, the physical genitalia is not in sync with the sex chromosomes. And I gave you a simple example. The female genitalia could be present in a person who is having XY. Or a male genitalia could be present in a person who is having XX. Intersex. Dono have उसमें, which is not differentiated, undifferentiated sex that is existing. So definitely talk about inheritance chart whenever you are writing this 9.4. Apart from that, the simple structure that you always have to follow when you are writing is, your introduction should be what is the nature of the syndrome. Then what is the diagnosis for the syndrome? What are the characteristics of the syndrome? What is the prognosis of the syndrome? That means the treatment of the syndrome. And what is the frequency of the syndrome? So this simple structure will give you a beautiful answer. Don't think anything, just put this and come. And in characteristic features, don't worry. Remember 4, 5. Examiner also will not know. But don't interchange. Don't make Downs fellow Pathouse, Edwards fellow Downs. No, that is problem. You remember 2, 3 or 4 important characteristic features. And with this structure, we will cover up the less points that are existing in characters. That's fine. And anyway, inheritance chart you will draw. And one addition you write, whatever be the question on chromosomal abnormalities, write the reasons. What are the reasons? Non-disjunction. Non-disjunction. This is due to what? This is due to the spindle fiber being frozen. Non-disjunction due to spindle fiber being frozen. Then anaphase lagging. Then a longitudinal splitting.
This one.
Longitudinal splitting. Then a faulty DNA replication. Faulty DNA replication, it could be such that 5 prime becomes 3 prime, 3 prime becomes 5 prime at times. Right? So faulty DNA replication, and you also have polyploidy condition. Polyploidy condition, or it could be polyspermia condition. Polyspermia condition. And it could also be what? Because of a faulty environment. What is happening in mutation? Mutational load. H.J. Muller studies and observes the mutational load in Japan. In Japan, regarding what? After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because of the nuclear blast. So because of the environment also we could have chromosomal abnormalities. That is what is epigenetics. Non-genetic factors impacting genetic factors. Write these 6.
All the level is
Anaphase lagging. Anaphase lagging, longitudinal splitting, faulty DNA replication. Anyway, 9.4 you have a question, this should be there in the answer. Put a dabba if you don't have a scope and write. Right? So that is any given day with respect to this. Okay. Right? So that is with respect to 9.4. In 9.5 I have nothing much to discuss except one small flow chart.
Also find out.
We have time now or no time?
The worst time was the time.
We have still 12 minutes, right? We'll finish physical, don't worry. Okay. When you look at 9.5, racial criteria. Racial criteria, 3 again. Morphological, genetic, and dermatoglyphics. When you look at morphological, it is morphometric and morphoscopic.
Yes, Pastor.
Morphometric and morphoscopic. In morphometric, cranial index, facial index, nasal index, height. In morphoscopic, skin, hair, eye, and body form. And body form. That's with respect to what? Morphological characteristic features or criteria for race. Then when you look at genetic, you see one is serological, non-serological, and DNA and chromosomes. When you look at serological, it is blood group, HB factors, RH factors, haptoglobin, blood, HB, RH, hapto. In non-serological, it could be what? The secretors. It could be what? PTC, phenyl thiocarbonate.
Looks like mixable gland.
That is a kind of gland, right? PTC, right? PTC recognition with respect to this. Okay. Then when you look at DNA and chromosome, you see the variation in the length. Variation in the length of Y chromosome. Variation in the length of Y chromosome, because Y chromosome, the length would vary across the races. In dermatoglyphics, you know anyway 3. loops, whirls, arches. These are loops. Yes. What is whirl? This is whirl. And arches? These are arches. Right? So that is a basic understanding with respect to race and racism.
So like from the zone HTML, more they stick those victims as
I
forget it. But then if this is all the short bit, it's tough. You know, I just want to tell me this.
right? I'm not very sure that which race has a longer Y chromosome, but they said depending upon the length of Y chromosome, we can understand, right? Next. Now I'm just talking about high altitude, right? So this year we have question, right? High altitude. Now, whenever you are writing 9.7, start with the concept of homeostasis. Start with the concept of homeostasis, always, right? And then talk about the characteristic features of environmental stress. And then talk about the adaptations and acclimatizations. In this, talk about the physiological as well as the cultural. The physiological as well as the cultural. And last, you definitely use Julian H. Stewart and Shawlins and Service. Julian H. Stewart and definitely Shawlins and Service in this context. Homeostasis is what? Homeostasis is a condition of equilibrium. Simple introduction could be what? Right? Any human being has a condition of homeostasis, which is equilibrium. And with the condition of environmental stress, the homeostasis is disturbed or disturbed homeostasis. And where human body adapts and acclimatizes to bring back homeostasis. And that is where you introduce and then you get into the other aspects. Now, when you look at high altitude, what do you see? The environmental stress is what? Oxygen is less, temperature is less, and sometimes the temperature could also be more. And you also see the moisture is less. And when you look at the different adaptations, one is the arterial receptors. Amma isko ratta marlo, please. It results in alveolar ventilation. And this will compensate oxygen. This will compensate oxygen. Next. Juxta. Glomerular. Juxtaglomerular complex of kidney. This will result in erythropoietin. This will further result in increase in RBC, and this will increase the blood volume by approximately 20 to 30%. And you also have a condition of angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is another condition which is observed here. Then the third important aspect here is diphosphoglyceric acid. Diphosphoglyceric acid will result in the rapid displacement of oxygen. Will result in the rapid displacement of oxygen. This will result in a cellular acclimatization. That will result in cellular acclimatization. And the last one that you will have to definitely remember, because these are little complex, but trust me, my dear, this is what is going to set the perception of the examiner right in the exam hall. Right? Increase mitochondrial
Let's just go.
enzymes. This will result in increased oxygen utilization efficiency. Oxygen utilization efficiency.
Hi.
Right? If you padalsinde. These will have to be there in your paper. Not very difficult. It's only that you'll have to be used to these words. Right? Then another kind that you could remember is the long-term responses and immediate responses. Long-term responses is what? Broad chest,
Yes.
small size of the body,
That's that. That's that.
low
That was just.
birth rate or low birth size, then high fetal hemoglobin,
Just good.
and
See.
the right side of the heart is large. The right side of the heart is large. Whereas when you look at immediate responses, the breathing rate increases, erythropoietin increases, lung surface area increases, blood volume
Yes.
increases, and the new capillaries increases. That is where I told you angiogenesis condition. Angiogenesis condition. Are you understanding this? Right? So these are some of the important dimensions that you can definitely mention in your answer. Is this clear? Yes. And I think yesterday we already made an understanding of epidemiological transition. Right? We'll again be little specific in 9.8. Babu, any question? Again. Any question from diseases 9.8, use this. Epidemiological transition of Umran. 1. Age of pestilence and famine. The explanation remains the same yesterday. Then age of receding pandemics. Then age of man-made and degenerative diseases. Age of man-made and degenerative diseases. See, you can use this with respect to epidemiological anthropology and also tribal health. In tribal health also, this is what is happening today. Yes, and one common dimension is, you see, sex-related disorders and sex-transmitted diseases is what is very common in tribal society. So you can discuss about those. Okay, so this is with respect to epidemiological transition and 9.8. We discussed about secular trends yesterday. Right? Again, growth and development chapter, definitely ensure that you're using secular trends. Positive, neutral, negative. Any of those will have to be used whenever you're writing a question on growth and development. Right? I don't have to dictate on theories of demography. No. Theories of aging. Aging theories and demographic theories, I think you're very aware. Okay, so more or less, that is all. I think just one small understanding with respect to forensic anthro. Yes.
is partially maybe
Fertility, fecundity.
it's here. Like
Actually, I have evolutionary theories, but I'm scared. You can write that in any answer. But I'm only worried whether will you be scared of remembering it, or I don't want to, I want you to maintain your homeostasis. I don't want to cause an environmental stress. And my agenda is very clear. We are here to revise as much as possible in less time. Yes, so whatever you have done, Ade, Paramanam, that is everything. Right? Let us not get destabilized with that, right? Because I have evolutionary theories of menarche and menopause. But simply use the word menarche and menopause also has evolutionary significance, which was an adaptive mechanism. This one line can suffice all those theories. What is that line? Menarche and menopause has evolutionary significance. Has evolutionary significance, which is considered as an adaptive mechanism. Which is considered as an adaptive mechanism. Adaptive mechanism to protect the uterus. Adaptive mechanism to protect the uterus. Yes. Now just one last flow chart on forensic and we'll wrap up for today. Forensic anthro.
all right. Good.
One, you have indicative mechanism. When you look at indicative mechanism, one is dermatoglyphics. Two, osteodontology. Three, DNA fingerprinting. DNA fingerprinting. Now this will definitely promote something called as personal identification. In personal identification, again you will have to, one is a person who is alive, the other is a person who is dead. In the alive person, the simple usage of genetic markers. The simple usage of genetic markers. In the context of dead person, one could be the morphological features. That could be the racial variation. Morphological features could be the racial variation. The other one is the skeletal remains. The skeletal remains, where we will use comparative anatomy. Where we will use comparative anatomy. And the third aspect that you will have to see in forensic anthro is the reconstruction. In the context of reconstruction, one is anatomical, the other one is mathematical. Anatomical is simple assembly of bones, and mathematical deals with stature calculations. Mathematical deals with stature calculations. Right? Now, one more extended aspects of this is with respect to comparative anatomy. Now when you talk about comparative anatomy here, one is age, the other one is sex. In the context of age, it is child and adult. With respect to child, the bone ossification sites, then degree of dental eruption. When you look at adult, it is the skeletal maturation. It is the skeletal maturation. Then in the context of sex, it is the skull and pelvis. Skull, male, female, male it is large, female it is small. Pelvis, male, female, male it is narrow, female it is broad or basin shaped. Broad or basin shaped. Yes, basin. Wash basin we say, no, basin shaped structure. Yes. Now when they ask you paternity diagnosis as 15 marker, use the same criteria that we used for this criteria. This could also be used for paternity diagnosis. That's the easiest. In movies and all you see, no, father will be having, or father will not be having mole, but that fellow will be having mole, but father's friend will be having mole. Morphologically, right? Right? So that is paternity diagnosis. Okay. And in case if they ask you tools of forensics, now when they ask you tools of forensics, use this only. Right? This is also nothing but tools of forensic. What are tools? Dermatoglyphics, DNA fingerprinting, yes, then genetic markers, then comparative anatomy, then anatomical and mathematical. These are tools of forensic, right? If they ask you something like that, you can happily mention this. So with that, we come to an end of paper 1. Tomorrow, you want to have or no? Paper 2. We'll have, right? It's your wish, right? I have no issues. You make me talk anthropology all day, I will speak, right? Niddarlo like physical anthro adu chepta, right? So, tomorrow we'll have paper 2. Tomorrow we'll finish because I just need one session. I don't even need 2.5 hours tomorrow. If I can hit it on it, I would hardly take 2 hours to finish whole paper 2. Right? We would have broad structures just like how we assembled for paper 1. Is this clear? Right? Mostly tomorrow we will have session back there itself. Just to avoid, like yesterday we had number of power cuts there. Right? We had shifted it here. Now it has been rectified. So tomorrow mostly we would have there only. Right? In Himayat Nagar branch. Is this clear? Right? We'll meet tomorrow at the same time. Thank you.